Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are y'all?
How are you? I'm fine. How about you?
Doing well. Thanks for asking. Just returning from vacation and my computer didn't want to come off of vacation, so had to quickly get on the Chromebook.
Okay.
So we can just know who's represented. I see your names, but what parish, if you could just state your parish, that would be great.
So I'm Glecia Duron. I'm the Director of Federal Programs in Iberia Parish, and I'm the one that asked for this training because we had a unique situation that we had never encountered all the way to supervisors back over federal funds. So we decided if we learn it the right way, then we won't have the problem in the future.
Welcome.
Petrie Walker with Caddo.
Carolyn Tubes from Calcasieu.
Good morning, Helen Calhoun from Natchitoches.
Good morning, Amy Fontenot from Lafayette Parish.
Good morning, Quintina Brown from Lafourche.
Good morning, Allison O'Donnell from Iberia.
Good morning, Aisha Buckner from Orleans Parish.
Good morning, Kimberly Capers from Caddo Parish.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I have 10 o'clock on my end, so we will, I don't know if I would call it party, but we will get this thing started. All right, so good morning. I am Dr. Antiqua Hunter, your state homeless coordinator here at the Louisiana Department of Education. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be with you guys on this morning to talk about such a sensitive topic such as domestic violence. We would like to just thank Glecia with Iberia Parish for initiating the conversation around such a sensitive topic. We are also pleased to have with us a few of my colleagues here at the Department of Education in our federal support team. Welcome aboard, and some of our Homeless Advisory Council liaisons joining the line because they thought this would be very informative for them as well as they continue to serve and administer technical assistance to a lot of their surrounding areas. So just welcome, welcome, welcome to our first in-service training on domestic violence. We are pleased to have Dr. Amy Fontenot with us from Lafayette Parish, which will be one of our presenters, as well as Petrie Walker and Kimberly Capers from Caddo Parish, and Laverne Dunn, which is our state homeless consultant. So they will facilitate our discussion on today. We only have an hour together, so we ask that if you have any questions as we are going through the content of our session on today, that you just hold those questions, jot them down so you won't forget what they are, and we will have time allocated at the end of this training to address those questions. But we want to ensure that we're able to get through all of the content in a timely manner as we proceed. So when it comes to domestic violence, we know that domestic violence can be physical or psychological, okay? And it can affect anyone of any age, gender, race, or sexual orientation. It may include behaviors that's meant to scare, cause physical harm, or control a partner. And while every relationship is different, and we know that there are many out there that exist, domestic violence typically involves an unequal power dynamic where one partner is asserting power over the other. So when we talk about some examples of domestic violence, it can occur in many different forms or fashions. It can come up in through insults, okay? It can be threats. It can be physical abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse. It can also be sexual coercion. Some perpetrators may use children, they may use pets or other family members as emotional leverage to get their victim to do whatever they might want them to do. In this case, we want you to take specific notes that when it comes to victims of domestic violence, their self-worth a lot of times is diminished. They experience anxiety. They may experience depression, and just a general sense of helplessness because of what they have to overcome when it comes to their abuser. So as we go through this hour together today, just keep those things in mind, because there's a lot riding on ensuring that our students of survivors of domestic violence are able to learn when they come to us, as well as ensuring the safety of those individuals involved. So when we look at our agenda today, how we're going to spend our next few minutes together, Kimberly Capers will open up with just the overall definition of McKinney-Vento to ensure that we're all on the same page, as well as discussing individuals that should be involved in a yearly in-service around this topic. And then we will talk about enrollment procedures and how they relate to what you guys do on the ground each and every day as homeless liaisons. And Dr. Fontenot will talk to us about restraining orders and how the FERPA records and how to ensure confidentiality is maintained throughout the entire process. And then we will have Petrie Walker to come and share with us some real life experiences of things that she has encountered in Caddo Parish when it comes to domestic violence, as well as available resources that are out there. And then Laverne Dunn, our homeless consultant, will close us out with questions and address any concerns that you may have at that time. So with that being said, I'm turning it over to you, Kimberly. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sure that most of us, if not all of us, are familiar with the McKinney-Vento definition, but let me go through it briefly. Homeless children and youth means individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And includes children and youth who are sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, campgrounds due to lack of alternative adequate accommodations, living in emergency or transitional shelters, or are abandoned in hospitals. And we know this also includes our domestic violence families. The next slide talks about or gives us a list of persons who need to be in service annually regarding domestic violence. Those persons are superintendents, principals, assistant principals, teachers, clerks, secretaries, counselors, school directors, Title I directors, special education directors, directors of transportation, bus drivers, security guards, school board attorneys. And it's really good to have an alert system so that everyone in your parish will know or have a code for those families that are domestic violence. They'll be able to easily identify them. I know we have one here in Caddo. Our next slide talks about our enrollment procedures. And as we know, McKinney-Vento students are to be immediately enrolled without records from previous schools, attend class, and participate fully in all school activities. Restraining orders. If you have a restraining order on hand or a copy of it, the following person should receive a copy of that restraining order. Now, first you want to meet with the parent or guardian to discuss their situation. Not all situations are life-threatening, so you need to meet with them to find out what you can and cannot share. The school should receive a copy and upload it if possible in the system. Make sure that the security guard or police officer receives a copy. Central office, school board personnel, the attendance department, counselor or counselors at the school, bus drivers. Make sure that only the people who need it receive a copy. And it's really important that you can get a copy of a photo and or description of the abuser as well as the abuser's vehicle, so that you will have that information on hand. I'm turning it over to Amy.
So it looks a little different with enrollment procedures when you do not have a restraining order in place. It's important to note that when there is no restraining order, the front office staff at a school site is limited with what they can do if the abuser presents at the school site. So if that parent, and oftentimes we say it's the mother with the children, but I've had a few instances where it's been the father with the children and it's the mother who is the abuser. So whoever, if those parents are both on the birth certificate, as a school system, you can't block that parent from getting information or accessing the child when they show up at the school site and they're able to identify with pictured ID, all of those kinds of things when a restraining order is not in place. So when you have one of those, it's great. You're able to come up with a hard, fast procedure. When that is not in place, you have to do things a little differently because we don't want to violate any parental rights. So it's important to make sure, number one, that they're on that birth certificate. Number two, we always, and as the bullet says here, give the mother a call, but it could in fact be the father that has the children. So whoever is that parent that's actually enrolling children into school, maybe on the run with the children, whatever it happens to be, you need to have a plan with that parent in place if the abuser shows up at the school site and wants access to the children. So when you're discussing that plan at enrollment time, you need to come up with a procedure. Are we going to call that parent to give them a heads up that the other parent has shown up at the school site and is trying to access the children? I know that many school sites, when they do that, they try to delay the checkout of the child or whatever the abuser has shown up to receive. They try to delay that until the other parent can arrive at the school site. You also need to involve your SRO, police officer, security guard, whatever you have at the school site. So that way, in the event something takes a negative turn, they are able to step in when both of those parents are on campus. It is very important to remember the safety of the students and the school, all personnel in that front office, teachers, people who are on recess duty, all of those kinds of things, that all plays a part in what we're talking about here. Very important to remember, it is a violation of the Privacy Act to give any information over the phone about any student, McKinney-Vento or not, but even more so with a McKinney-Vento student. There may be a situation where a family member of the abuser is trying to get information from the school site. They may be trying to just verify if the student is present today. All of that information is private. You cannot release that information over the phone. You also, as I mentioned earlier, you want to work with that parent to create a list, a plan, who is allowed to check out the student, who can we call in the event of emergency, sickness, any of those kinds of things. The second to last bullet is letting us know that McKinney-Vento law does specifically allow to be able to change a student's identity in the J campus on course. Whatever system you have with your school district, you are able to change that information to protect that student's privacy. For example, I had a situation just a couple of years ago where federal marshals, a parent came into my office under the protection of the Federal Marshal Service. They were coming from another state, pending a trial in another state, all of those kinds of things. And our school district had to go through our MIS department to actually give these students a different last name in our database so that they were not able to be tracked until that trial was over. You think that's something minor, or there's no way another state could track through your database. Yes, they can. So you need to be aware that you are able to change a student's information, create a new student with new information in your system, but you must go through your MIS department because there are certain things that need to happen because of MFP funding and those kinds of things. So your MIS department is who will handle that, your student information system. The last bullet says, sometimes we do have to place a student at another school that is maybe not in the zone that you have for your shelter, or in some instances in a whole different school district to be able to protect their identity. So, really taking a look at school of origin, but also what is in the best interest of the student. Sometimes you do have to make that transfer. So it's really important to notice that. FERPA and records. This is a big one, probably the most important thing that I've come across, and really needing to understand deeply to make sure you don't violate anything here. First and foremost, before I even start on the FERPA piece, this has come about because of all of the virtual learning that everybody is doing now, not only here, but across the country. Most school districts in Chromebooks, they have placed software that is able to track the Chromebook, that device. So when the student moves to another school district, another state, they are able to track the device, or if it's missing, if it's lost, whatever, to get it returned. Well, there's also a situation where the school system can track to the actual address of where that device is being used. So you need to remember that for a student that is in a domestic violence shelter, that Chromebook or whatever electronic device they're using, if they're continuing to do their online education from a previous school district, you need to get that Chromebook or that device out of the shelter, because they can be tracked to the specific address. That was new, something new for us this year with all the virtual learning. And so I want to make sure that everyone else is aware of that in the event this happens. This happens in your situation where a student is coming in with doing online learning from a previous school district. Get that device out of the shelter and get it returned to the previous school district as soon as possible. And then you issue them one from your school district. Specifically talking to FERPA and records, very important to note that FERPA does not require parents' written permission to transfer records to another school district if that student is transferring there. So if they are transferring from District A to B, you do not need parent written permission to get the records to District B. A school district, a homeless liaison from the new district, a homeless liaison from any other district, homeless liaison from your own district can actually request those records and get them transported to the receiving school district. Now, what most school districts require is that request in writing. Sometimes it's a fax, sometimes it's an email, whatever that school district is requiring, that homeless liaison or the next school district is able to request that without parent written permission. The following bullets do show several other agencies or personnel that can also get those records without parent permission, and that's any federal, state, and local education personnel. McKinney-Vento does specifically note that you can pass those records through the Attorney General's office. You can, and we've actually done this several times with other school districts, where when you're trying to protect a student's location of where they currently are, just in case that there is a high safety concern, and it's not for every student of domestic violence in McKinney-Vento, but those specific ones, you legally can route those records through other school districts so that the school district of origin is not able to track where the student has now transferred. And so that is called creating a shadow school. You can even do a shadow school district in that case. The homeless liaison can, if it's not a serious situation where the district can be identified of where the student is now residing, but maybe not the actual school that they're attending, everything can go through the homeless liaison's office, where the student's current address would be that liaison's office or the main school district's address. And that would be creating a shadow school as well. So that can look different depending on what the situation might be. You can also send records through the Office of the State Coordinator for Homeless Education in each state. The case that I was mentioning to you previously about the federal marshal situation with another state, those records actually were sent through 2 different states. They went through Texas and Maine before they actually got here to Louisiana. That was all coordinated through the actual state coordinator's office for homeless education with the Department of Education in each of those states. Again, this doesn't happen with all of your students in a McKinney-Vento and not even all of your domestic violence students. But in these types of situations, you do have options of how to get those records routed so that students are protected. Staff can also pick up records and take them to new schools. So a homeless liaison can actually request those records, can physically go to a school site, receive them, and transport them to another homeless liaison, which happens all the time. Also very important to note that students that have IEPs or 504 plans, any of those kinds of things. The SIR system with our state will alert a former school when the new school district goes in to request jurisdiction over that student's IEP. That previous school district will be identified. They will know where the student now is. So you really need to work with your special education department when you have a student of domestic violence in one of these types of safety issues that happens to be under the special education umbrella, to really work with your SPED department so that that student's location can remain private and confidential until it's not necessary anymore. Very, very important. And we always have to go back to what Kimberly said on the last slide, or 2 slides ago at the beginning, immediate enrollment. So a student that has an IEP, the receiving school district, it is vital that they receive those records to know what accommodations, what modifications, what did their education setting look like, so that that can immediately happen in the new school district. You know, IDEA has its own violations separate from McKinney-Vento. You certainly, when putting those together, there is just a whole host of things that happen when that is not followed correctly. Again, very important to bring up that a parent does not have to physically be at the school site to enroll at the new school. So a homeless liaison can handle that if the parent is not able to leave the shelter for any reason. If they're under protective custody, the homeless liaison can actually take care of that enrollment. At some point, yes, the parent will need to do some documentation and all of that with the school, but that can go through the liaison for that immediate enrollment piece. And as we said on the last bullet, the liaison can actually be the one to request those records from a previous school, from the state, wherever. You know, really the liaisons work together. School sites may not know what's going on behind the scenes, but the liaisons are the ones tasked with this job to make sure records are transferred so that someone is withdrawn. So truancy is not continuing to mark a student absent at a previous school district when they're already attending somewhere else. So really those liaisons are the key pieces that make that happen. But it is very important that all the bullets that I just talked about, so important what Kimberly was talking about, the different people, different groups of people that need to be trained. Student services department, your special education department, your principals, all enrollment staff at every school site, they need to be aware of the bullets that I just went over with you. That is really, that's the boots on the ground. That's who's handling the transfer of paperwork. They need to be aware of this annually. I don't know in other school districts, but I know in mine that front office staff often changes. And so this has to be done routinely, not even just once a year anymore. We're really talking about, you know, looking at maybe once a 9 weeks, once a quarter, twice, 2 or 3 times a school year, something like that, to make sure any new personnel is aware of this, just so that you don't get yourself into a tough spot. And now I'll turn it over to Petrie.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk with you about a couple of cases that we've actually had in Caddo. That we really had to work with families to keep them protected. About 4 years ago, a family called me from a school. They had already been identified as domestic violence, but didn't think that the father would find them. The father showed up at the school with the birth certificate and shot records, presented it to the school, and they did allow him to see the child. Well, the mother had received a call about her grandchild. And so she also showed up at the school. And when she went to the office, he was at the office talking with the front desk clerk about that particular child. And that frightened her so that she ran out of the office. He followed her out of the office and kept trying to harass her. At that time, the school had given her address, her telephone number, and she called me on the phone, frantic, as she was walking to her car. And he kept talking to her. I know where you live. I know your number now. And one of the coaches at the school went to get the security guard. And so the security guard walked her to her car, asked him to leave her alone. So she went home. A couple of days later, he showed up at her door, and she didn't know who it was. He knocked on the door, And as soon as she found out who it was, she tried to close it. He put his foot in her door and started trying to talk to her. So she started screaming and hollering. The neighbor next door heard it, called the Shreveport police. Then he came out and asked him to leave and told him that the police department had been called. She, at that point, called me and said she has to move. He's found out where I live. So we worked with her to find new housing. Once we found new housing, it was in a different school district. So we went to the previous school to pick up the records and take it to the new school. Well, even before we could really get the ball working, get into the system, the dad knew where the new school was. He showed up at the new school the next day, and the assistant principal was talking to him. He showed his documents again that he was the legal father. And we had put a notation in the J campus that this was very serious from the previous incident that May. So when the new school came, we put some information into J campus. The father then said that he wanted to see his son. And so the principal said, your son is not here. Well, we took the records to one school, but we ended up really enrolling in a different school. The principal gave my name. He said, well, who do I need to talk to? Said, well, you need to talk to Petrie Walker and McKenna Vento. So then the father went to my director and told my director that I was trying to prevent him from seeing his child. Well, school had just started. We moved the child to another school because the grandchild, it wasn't a space available for him. So she wanted both children to be at the same school. So we moved them to another school. He also went to the attendance director to try to get information about the child. They referred him back to me in McKenna Vento. Well, he then called the State Department. At that time, Tasha Anthony was our director, a coordinator of homeless program. So then she called me, she said, you need to be careful. He's called, he's making some allegations that you're trying to prevent him from seeing his child. I said, okay. So about a week later, I received a call from the Shreveport Police Department, an investigator, that he went to the investigator and alleged that I was keeping him from seeing his child, that his previous wife was not homeless, that she was erroneous enrolled into our program. So she called, she said, Petrie, I knew it was more to this because I know you. I said, yes. So he just happened to talk to an investigator that I've been on a committee with, the human trafficking committee with. So she called me and she told him that, well, you need to go through the courts if you need any additional information. So he didn't stop there. Then he started following me home. And I noticed this truck, didn't think anything of it. So I started doing different things before I went home. And he kept coming by to get information from the attendance department. Never called me directly to get the information. He was going around me to get the information that he wanted. At that point, I called the parent in the office. I said, you know what? You probably need to get a protective order. So she came into the office. I invited the head of security for our district to come into the office, and she told him about the situation. He put some things in place with the security guard that he supervised at the school until we actually received the paperwork of the protective order. So I was able to call it's the YWCA at that point, but they came to my office as well and worked with her to get the protective order written. They took it to the courthouse, the judge saw it and signed it. So we had a protective order at that point in place. Once the protective order was in place, then he tried to go get some information and they still said, you need to talk to Petrie Walker and McKenna Vento. So at that point, I knew I needed to in-service our principals again about not giving my name. So after that meeting, then I was served with a lawsuit. So Cato was involved in a lawsuit because of this case. He was seeking joint custody. And a couple of things that was in the lawsuit stated that I was coerced and I was a co-conspirator, trying to keep him from seeing his child. I had enrolled her in other federal programs that she was not eligible for. So she was receiving supposedly food stamps, unemployment money, just all kind of things that were not true because she didn't have a social. He didn't know that we use community partners to help us pay rent and buy food and assist with utilities. He said I was using McKinney-Vento money at that point to pay for her rent, to pay for her housing, and to pay for food in this lawsuit as well. So I was served papers and I was asked to give a copy of the entire record. So it is so important that you have documentation of everything, how you qualify them, the situation, what you work with, who you talk to. And I didn't put specific people in the community that I had asked for money, but I said we assisted her in collecting her rent and we assisted with food. So that went to his attorney and went to the judge. The record was gone through with a fine tooth comb. So make sure your documentation is in order. After that, the mother called me again crying. She was in Arkansas. And she said, I just talked to Social Security. Her child was on, and they're saying they're cutting my child off Medicaid because I don't have my child. She said, and I'm in Arkansas. I can't prove that I have my child with me. Well, the father went to Social Security, told Social Security that he had the child and that he'd had the child for 3 years. So the mother sent me a picture of her and the child, asked me to go to Social Security. So I did. I printed out the demographics that was in our system, went to show them that this is the person that I've been working with this child, and that she definitely has the child in her custody. She was getting ready to be accused of fraud when in actuality, it was him. So then I talked with the Social Security supervisor and gave her some information. Well, lo and behold, when I was pulling up the information in the database about what school and who enrolled, we found another child, same child, enrolled at a different school. He had went and enrolled the child in the school where he lived, in a district where he lived. How he did that to this day, we still do not know. So there were 2 sheets in the system with this child's information, one with him being the parent and the other one with the mother being the parent, the domicile parent. So that was it also in the records that I sent as well. And we knew that it was his address, his telephone number. So he's the one that went and enrolled the child at a different school. Weeks went by. She called me again. She said, I have not received my child support in months. I said, oh, okay. So, well, have you gone to talk to someone at child support? She went and she talked with the supervisor at the child support office. They would not even give her information of why the check was cut. But she later found out he went to the child support office and said that he had the child, that she was on the street, homeless and on drugs. And so, and she said, and you're supposed to appear in court in 3 days. She knew nothing. They had not notified her of the court hearing. If she had not just called to see why she was not receiving the child support check, the child support at that point would have been stopped. We went to court with her for the child support. She had a landlord that was there that she had been paying. She had some church members there. She had a pastor there. And of course, McKinney-Vento was there as a witness if she needed to call us on the stand. Well, when he came by the door, he saw all these people with us. Oh, and also I had the supervisor of the security department with me for my security. So, and her security while we were in court. So he went each time I went to court. And when we got there, he tried to stop the hearing on the child support because he didn't want the truth to come out that he had to run. He had his outfit on. He's a fireman, so he's well known in the city. And because he has his fireman outfit on, they just assume he's telling the truth. So at that time, I called the district attorney because he was trying to stop the court proceedings. I had already spoken to the district attorney. He's a beach I'm on my way. So he came over and I said, he's trying to stop the proceedings and this lady needs her money so she could live, pay her rent, and we have money for lights, water, and food. So he went up to the young man and he said, why are you here? And he told him, I'm here because I'm trying to stop the child support. He said, so you have the child? And he said, yes, I do. He said, and where did you drop the child off this morning? And then he said, well, who are you? The father said, who are you? And he said, I'm the assistant district attorney. And so he said, so where did you drop the child? I dropped him off at school. He said, what school? He said, do I need my attorney? He said, you may when we get through with this conversation. He said, so where did you drop the child off this morning? He never told him. He just kept saying, I dropped my child off at the school. So then he went to the child support people and said, this guy is not telling the truth. I have the evidence that the mother has the child, and they dropped it, sent the child support back to her. Well, this January, they kept putting court off. Every time I would go to court, they would reschedule. Well, we went to court in January. I did have to testify of the services. His attorney kept saying, I knew her before she was enrolled in our McKinney-Vento program. And I said, well, no, I don't. She said, well, wasn't you there when the baby was born? I said, no, ma'am, I was not there. I just met her when a staff person brought her to me with this situation. I said, no, I was not there when the baby was born. Didn't you pay her rent? I said, well, we work with community partners to assist to pay the rent. She said, you didn't take this out of federal funds? I said, well, no, ma'am, we can't use federal funds to pay rent, lights, gas, water, and food. I said, we can't use federal funds for that. Well, I think you paid with federal funds. I said, no, ma'am, I didn't. So at that point, then the judge said, badger and move on if you have another question. So then she asked me about the house that she was living in. And he said, is that your house? I said, no, it isn't. She's renting from someone else. And so they were alleging that I was taking care of this family out of McKinney-Vento funds. It was a whirlwind. So now they won the court case and he's appealing the decision of the judge. And the judge did say that in the court documents that there was no coercion between me and her. There was no trying to prevent him from seeing his child because there was a protective order in place where he could not see his child. So that case is still going on today, and it's been 4 years now. And I'm still may have to go back to court with her. So that's one case. And that's probably the most serious case I've ever been involved in, where I actually had to go to court and have been accused of doing things with federal funds that, of course, we cannot do. We had a situation where a mother came to Shreveport, was at a domestic violence shelter, and had a protective order at the school. The father and his mother came with another protective order. So the school called me and said, well, what do we do? I said, well, let me call the judge and sign a protective order in Caddo. So we called the judge at the juvenile courts. She actually came to the school and had a hearing to determine who the child would go with, which protective order is enforced. And so the mother did have to give the child to the father at that point because he had his protective order evidently before she received her protective order. And so that child did have to go with the father and his mother, even though they had the court proceedings. We've had several different cases, and one other scenario I just want to tell you about where the father showed up at the school. There was no protective order in place. She was at a domestic violence shelter, but she was working on the protective order. He found out that the child was enrolled at a particular school. We then called the mother to tell her that he was here, that we can delay it, but we cannot deny him from getting his child if that's what he wanted to do. She came to the office with a police officer and someone from the shelter, and they were able to give her the child, but since she was the one that enrolled the child, and he had to go back and try to get some paperwork in order to try to take the child. Well, I guess a couple of months after that, they actually had to go to court, and they went to court in Monroe, Louisiana. The sheriff's department took the mother to court. After court, she felt comfortable that she could go to her mother's home after that. Well, he showed up at the mother's home. He killed the mother and the child and shot her. She lived, but her mother and her child died. And so, you know, I think about the safety of the school, that if he had gone off at the school, you know, the school really needs to be in a lockdown mode when a father comes up and there's a very, very abusive situation where he may try to take the child at any cost. And so that's the importance of talking with the mother prior to enrolling the child in the school to make sure that the school is ready. If he shows up, what is the protocol? What should we be doing? And, you know, one of the first things is to get your police officer and your security guard. Lock down the school where no one can get in any classroom during that time while they're trying to figure out what's going on. So safety of that school, of the child, the mother is so important with a domestic violence situation. And sometimes they'll say, well, Petrie, you know, I don't think he will do this. I don't think he will do this. Okay, but if he comes, what would be your procedure? What would you want us to do? And of course, the first thing is to call them to give them time to get there. All right, that's my 3 scenarios. Oh, and then we have a lot of available resources. Your state coordinator is definitely someone that you can depend upon. Other homeless liaisons. When I first came aboard, I mean, the Lafayette and the Baton Rouge liaison and the New Orleans, they actually helped to train me to be the person that I am today with McKinney-Vento. And at that time, we were regional meetings where we talked about scenarios. We went through the entire sensitivity training on communication and how to work with schools, how to work with parents, how to work with administrators. Of course, your National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, your National Center for Homeless Education, your Domestic Violence Hotline, your National Law Center, and your National Network to End Domestic Violence. Those are all wonderful resources that you can use. And my thing is, once you run across that, because you may run across something else, I call my state coordinator. Okay, we have this situation. What should we do? And then, you know, depending upon how they tell us to proceed, that's what we will do. Because I've had situations where I didn't want to give him to the dad, even though his name was on the birth certificate. I didn't want to because I knew if I did that it was to coerce the mother to coming back. And there's just no telling of what would have happened to her and the child. So I just know that sometimes it can be a very, very serious, and they know that their children are the ones that will get them to go back in this situation if someone takes the child. When I worked at a domestic violence shelter, I remember it was a judge and his wife was in Shreveport. She was somewhere in Louisiana from another place, but he was able to find out all kind of information and set up where they were out on a picnic and had the child kidnapped. And she didn't have a choice but to go back home to get her child because she feared for her child's safety at that point. So just there can be some very, very serious situations. Thank you all.
Okay, now it's time for question and answers. Does anybody have any questions of our presenters? Any comments at this time? You can actually raise your hand, or you can type it in the chat box.
I will ask the first question for everyone. And this question anyone can address it, either of the presenters. We know that the role of a homeless liaison is very, very daunting. I mean, you have a lot of different things that you have to do. What is the first step when a parent is involved in a domestic violence situation? How are you informed that it is in fact a domestic violence situation? Because I know the forms, the student residency questionnaire and things like that doesn't ask that information. So how are you guys informed that there is a situation you need to be aware of?
I don't know if you want us to just jump in, but so for us here in Lafayette, at my largest domestic violence shelter, there is an education or a child advocate on staff at that particular shelter that works directly with me. When I tell you we are on first name basis, we are speed dial on each other's phone, and she calls me immediately when it's something out of the ordinary. So if it's a situation where we call it a no contact situation, she will contact me. We have a discussion. They will bring the parent in, or I go to the shelter to meet with the parent to figure out who is it that we're trying to block? What legal paperwork do we have, if any? Have the legal advocates already started working with the parent? Where are they in the process? Oftentimes that legal advocate will also give me information, but that first jumping off point is the educational or the child advocate at the shelter contacting me directly, and then we move forward with whatever the procedure. And sometimes it looks different for each family in their shelter depending on the situation. But for anything out of the ordinary, they contact me first, and then we move forward with the procedure we have in place.
Families that are not in the domestic violence shelter, once they identify on our referral form, there's some questions that we ask just to get more information about their homelessness. And if it's a domestic violence situation, then they're actually called in to our office, and we talk with them about the situation to see what safety precautions do we need to put in place at the district level.
Great, thank you.
All right, there anybody else? Is there any other questions? With such great information. Okay, here's another question from Glecia Duran. She says, regarding the suggestion to flag the students in CIS, are we referring to the homeless flag, or are we referring to a special flag for domestic abuse? If a flag for domestic abuse, is there a code that already exists? Or is this something handled by individual LEAs? Do you require legal paperwork to initiate this domestic abuse flag, or just trusting the alleged victim? I'm not sure. I don't think anyone said, when they're talking about flagging students in CIS, the only flag that they have in CIS is to flag someone as homeless. I don't think you all said anything about flagging someone as domestic violence in your CIS system. You weren't referring to that. Would you give them some clarity on that situation, please? Amy, I think you talked about that.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so the flag that we do in our J Campus system is simply the homeless tag. The code, the date that they started, this program start date, program end date, services have been provided. I don't ever put anything on J Campus in terms of a specific situation. But what we have done in the past, when it is a no contact situation, for whatever reason, we will put in the comment box, I type in the date, like if it was today, I was putting the comment in today, I would put the comment today's date. I would put mother needs to be contacted before child can be released to anyone. And I put my initials, or today's date, the homeless education department needs to be contacted before the child is released to anyone, and with my initials, something like that. Those are the alerts, and we put that alert, and it usually goes in a red box, something like that. We never put the kid's situation, the parent situation, anything like that in J Campus. So I would not recommend any sort of domestic abuse flag, nothing like that. Simply tagging them as under their program codes in J Campus as a homeless student. And then if the parent indicates, or if there's a restraining order in place, that needs to be listed somewhere on there, just so that whoever is working that front office knows that they have to abide by an alert code, that there's something going on with that, or who needs to be contacted. But that's the only tagging that we do, is that program code in J Campus.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Duran? Wait, does anybody else? Yes, that answered her question. Thank you. Anybody else? Does anybody else have any questions?
The only thing that I would add, that if there is a serious situation with the domestic violence, please contact the principal so that you can let them know what's going on, and anyone that he suggests, like the front office, to let them know as well that something is going on. Not giving all the particulars, but letting know that it's a serious situation. Somebody may come, because if we had known up front that this father was going to come to the office, we would have notified the principal at the school to say, if he shows up, please let us know first before you give any information out.
All right. Well, since there's nobody else that have any questions, I just asked the presenters, is there one final comment? You all did just an excellent job. I knew that you would. And thank you so much for your information, your scenarios, and informing us about what happens when we have a domestic violence situation and shadow districting. Is there one more comment before we close this presentation?
I guess really my final thought would be, really homeless liaisons have to work together. It's really the behind the scenes, making the phone calls, making sure they're enrolled, getting those records, putting them in touch with community partners, all of those things, trying to create some sort of school stability so that the family can take care of what they need outside the school day, and that we know the kids are safe. And really, like Petrie said, you cannot put enough safety measures in place, because we just don't know what measures another parent, partner, anything might do to get access to that child. And we cannot stress that enough. Homeless liaisons work together, call each other, figure out, problem solve, and put those safety plans in place.
Ms. Laverne, this is
Yes.
Daphne at the State Department. You guys did an excellent job. As a former administrator, I want to say too, that administrator needs to work hand in hand and support that homeless liaison, and also work with that other administrator that's involved, as well as security, also involve your school board attorney. It is very good, like both of them, it was obvious, they have security or law enforcement in place to assist the school. And that is a huge, huge factor as well. But great job. And boy, you all brought back some memories. but you're doing an excellent job.
Great. Anybody else? If not, I would just, on behalf of Dr. Hunter, anything else?
Yes, so I would just like to take the time to thank you guys. I knew you could do it. You did us well on sharing such vital information with all of the other liaisons, as well as the Homeless Advisory Council, as they continue to administer technical assistance. We will be able to get this recording out to the other 100+ liaisons in the state so that they will be able to listen in and know what protocols and procedures that should be put in place. But I will say, we can't do any of this without relationships with the parents. You have got to know who your parents are, the family situations, the dynamics that exist, because there are so many times where you may have a mother that's afraid to share that information. They may be fleeing and seeking shelter, but they're not, sharing all of the information that they need to because they're just really fearful. And so by just being in constant communication with your students at the school, talking to them, ensuring that, a lot of you guys in your RFAs, you put that you wanted to allocate, and this was actually mandatory, mental health counseling. Getting those trauma-informed practices embedded into what you do on a daily basis is so important, because can you imagine the trauma that those parents are experiencing with the father showing up at the door, or being in the office when they show up? It's very traumatizing, and the kids are very much aware of this as well. So we need to take a step further, not just making sure that we're protecting the child at school, but okay, how do we follow up beyond that? So ensuring that we're putting those pieces of the puzzle in place to get them the mental health counseling that is needed. We thank you guys so much for attending today, Iberia. I hope that you guys have a better understanding now of how to handle a domestic violence situation. And we look forward to many more trainings. It's already been suggested that we host something like this at LASAFAP in the upcoming future. So we will look into that platform as well. So once again, thank you guys so much. You have a great day, and we will talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.